This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
Well, that just about takes care of that, doesn't it?
Come, live the nightmare of your choice. Tales from the Dark Side.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz.
And I'm Gil Adler.
Our guest in this episode is a guy who you know, he's done so many fascinating things. He's such a, well, I guess, getting right down to it, John Harrison is the total movie making package.
I wonder if he could sing.
Now there's a question. Well, he certainly has. He can story tell.
He certainly can.
And here's the proof. You really are the total movie making person. You write, you direct, you produce, you do the score. God, if you could sew, you really would be the whole shebang.
Well, I get bored easily.
Where are you originally from? You live in New Hampshire now. Is that where you're from?
No, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, which is how my career really got started in filmmaking, because I was a musician for a while in my younger days. I mean, I kind of I've been a working professional musician pretty much all my life. And after school, I was on the road for a few years, working with a guitarist named Roy Buchanan and touring with him and making records. And then I came back to Pittsburgh. School? Well, I went to Emerson College in Boston.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah. And Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. Wow. Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
So,
what did you study?
Theater.
Theater.
Not filmmaking, interestingly enough. Not filmmaking. It was theater. Yeah. Because there weren't any. The films. Neither one of those universities had film programs. So I never went to film school. But I was lucky enough to be back in Pittsburgh when George Romero was really hitting his stride. And because my partners and I had a small little production company, and we were doing commercials and industrials, and we raised some money and did a low budget theatrical. We encountered George. We all became friends. He was a dear friend of mine and one of my mentors all my career. Yeah. We started working together. And that's how my career as a filmmaker, such as it is, got started. And it was also the opportunity because back then it was really independent filmmaking, truly independent. There was no Weinstein Company or Miramax or Fox Searchlight or any of those things back then. We all had to do a bit of everything. Yeah. And we were doing, I think it was Creepshow. And George, I was his assistant director. And he said, you know, I've been thinking we need a theme for this. I said, well, I've got some stuff and I'll tinkle out some things. And one thing led to the next. And that's how I got involved in doing film scoring.
And you've done quite a lot.
A few, yeah.
Yeah.
It is a horrible, hauntingly accurate vision of the mindless excesses of a society gone mad.
They must be destroyed on sight.
In 1978, in Dawn of the Dead, you're the uncredited screwdriver zombie.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting story because I got a call from the producer, who was a dear friend of mine, Zilla Clinton, and she said, John, George wants me to call you and see if you'll come out and do a bit, like a zombie bit. And I said, well, it's like 7 o'clock at night. I mean, what's going on? Because they had to shoot at night because they had control of the mall. And so they shot all night. And he said, well, we've got a continuity problem. In right to left, one of the lead characters is running and he's got a sweater attached to his waist. But on the reverse, he doesn't have the sweater. Everybody forgot about it. So we need a gag to get the sweater off. And I said, well, look, I've got a big pitch tomorrow with a local bank to sell a commercial. And, I got to be on, so I can't be out there all night. She said, oh, no. The gag will take 10 minutes. Just come out. Tom Savini will make you up. You'll do the thing. Well, of course, I didn't get on the set until about 2 a.m. And they did the gag. Savini had rigged up this screwdriver. So I tackle the actor Scotty Reininger, and I tear off the sweater. So in the reverse, that's the reason he doesn't have it.
Yeah.
And then he stabs me in the ear with a screwdriver and fills my ear with blood. So I get home in time to take a shower and take a nap, and I get up and I go into the bank, and I'm talking to this vice president, and he's looking at me weird, and I'm doing my pitch, and I said, "Is there something wrong?" And he said, "Well, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you're bleeding out of your ears." I hadn't washed it all off.
Oh boy.
We got the job. So
Cool. Good. There's a happy ending.
yeah.
You should have used that. You should have used that and said, "Yeah, well, I don't usually bleed out of my ears, but when I get very nervous about not getting a job,
Yeah.
it's what happens."
If you don't give me a job, I might collapse right here in your office.
George Romero was very particular about how he wanted people to perform as zombies.
Well, he's created the zombie style, the zombie walk. I mean, there is the 28 Days Later kind of movement now, and when they did the remake of Dawn, they had them move fast. His whole thing was, well, look, man, they're dead. They're all messed up, man. So they're not going to like run at like 80 miles an hour. So he had a very kind of, he would act it out. He would show us, what to do.
What makes a great zombie movie or a great zombie show versus a crap zombie show?
Oh, wow. Well, by me,
they can't all be good, can they?
Well, no, because it's a trope and you can do it over and over and over again, but something else has to be there for it to be, So my feeling about George's movies is that they had great characters, and they also had something to say about the milieu in which they were made. I mean, if you look at Night of the Living Dead, the whole racial component of it, and then Dawn of the Dead, the whole consumer component, and then you get to Day of the Dead, and it's really like, okay, well, society's fucked, and now what do we do? And we're living underground, and we're really we've got the military on one hand, the scientists on the other, and the twain are not going to meet. And how do we survive? And to me, and I think George would agree with this, he said, I was never really making movies about zombies. I was making movies about us and what would happen in those situations.
Toby Hooper felt the same way when he was doing Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It
Yeah.
really isn't about a family cutting up people just for the fuck of it. It's making a statement about what the modern world has done to us all.
Yeah, I think that George was incredibly successful with it, and he created a genre, which has spawned all kinds of imitations and other things. And one of his acolytes, Greg Nicotero, is running Walking Dead,
right,
and also running the Creepshow series. And we've tried to really honor the origination of it. We've updated them when we can, but we're not trying to reinvent the wheel and call it Creepshow or Walking Dead and say that it's something else or make it something else.
When you go to score something like Creepshow or the George's movies, how do you approach that? What are you looking for to spark the first notes flowing?
Well, that's kind of hard to answer, because those kinds of things usually those kinds of things are usually like, you're sitting there and you're just like banging away at something, and oh, that sounds cool, and you'll try and do it. And obviously you're influenced by the other guys that have done it, and the great masters, and not just the horror matter. I mean, I love movie music, so I've got a collection of scores and stuff. So I never wanted to just write scary music, as it were. But the difference for me, and it was really an advantage, is that because I was George's assistant director, I was there on the set with him day in and day out. And, it's very rare that a composer has time with a director. Not forget the time I had, but even a long length of time. There are the exceptions, there's the Bernard Herrmann and Hitchcock. There's Spielberg and Williams and, Joe LaDuca and got, people who are able to have a relationship long term with the director. And then you can really get into their heads creatively. And so sitting with George day in and day out, and he had a great musical sense. We could talk about it. And he could say, we need something here, man. Why don't we do?
But there was an even deeper connection. I mean, granted, those composers had long-term creative relationships with particular directors, but your relationship to the film itself, you were there day to day. You're basically managing the floor.
Yeah, and really realizing what George is trying to do creatively.
Your understanding of the storytelling is on a completely different level. I don't think any other composer, I'm not aware of any other composer who's ever worked as a first.
You're right. The situation I had was unique. And
insight.
Then the other thing which was really interesting, as opposed to being delivered a cut at the end, I was there through all of post. So, for example, on Day of the Dead, I literally set up my gear downstairs from the editing rooms, and Pat Buba, who was the editor, and George would slide VHSs through the mail slot, and I would hook them up and watch the scene, and they'd say, okay, here's the scene. What do you think? I would sit there and I would noodle a temp. Now I had some gear, I had a couple of music processors. I didn't do the whole score on them, but it was enough to give George and Pat a really good idea of what I wanted to do. I would run it upstairs, transfer it to Mag, lay it up, and then we would see, well, this works, that doesn't work. Maybe we should, how about if it's shorter so it'll hit here and hit here? And that was all the way through post. So by the time we got to the mixing stage, I'd basically temped the whole movie. And all I had to do was go into a recording studio and re-record it so it had the right quality. But it was already laid up. And George, being the guy that he was, he always wanted me there for the mixes. That's really unusual. Most composers, they get the cut. You got 6 weeks. Give me the score.
Yeah.
And that's that. To me, music is as much a story element of a good movie as dialogue or cinematography. If it's done right, and that doesn't mean that the music should tell you how to feel or necessarily. It should support what you're supposed to feel. But it can really be a story element of any good movie. I mean, if you think about the great movies and the music that just is in your mind because of those movies.
Surely. I mean, Gil, you've always said that whenever you've approached directing, you start with what's the music?
Yeah, I would always start with the music.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, it never really dawned on me that I was doing it overtly. I would just, that's where I would start. Even when Alan and I would write something, and if I was going to direct it, the first thing I would do was I would spend agonizing hours thinking, okay, what's the style of the music? And so when I did What's Cooking, the episode with Christopher Reeve and Meatloaf, I was like, well, this has got to be, the music has to add something to it, and what style? And I went back to early Louis Armstrong.
Oh yeah, yeah.
No one really listened to early Louis Armstrong except nerds like me. And so I said, that could work, because that sort of juxtaposes the action in a way that's kind of clever and yet cute and smart. And then that led for me to figure out shot structure.
I was going to say, were you listening to the music while as you were prepping?
Yes.
So you would have it in your mind. Yeah.
Yes, and I was listening to the music in my head as I was shooting. Because I knew, okay, I want it to be like this, like early Louis Armstrong, this rhythmic or this slow down bluesy.
The pacing.
I had it in my head.
It's funny because not many directors have a musical sense. A lot of them, I'll know it when I hear it, or, I like it, or I don't like it, or I really don't know what I want here. I've been in not pitch meetings, but, production meetings where the director will be there and the composer will be there. Well, where do you're spotting, right? And well, I don't know, should music go here or shouldn't it go here? And it's when they
Right.
kind of look, they're flailing. What you're doing is really great.
Yeah, and it really helps me a lot. I mean, it's really out of self-preservation that
Yeah.
I did it, because it enabled me to open up my head to, okay, that's that and the other. And then when we did in Bordello,
Mhm.
and we got Michael Kamen of all people to score it with Chris Boardman, when we sat down with them, I was able to say, well, I mean, I'm looking for you to tell me kind of where you think the music should be, because you've done this so many more times than I have.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking it's this kind of music for that, and it's this kind of music for over here. What do you guys think of that? How do you feel about that? Is that
And I'm sure they appreciated that, to have some kind of direction rather than just saying, you come up with the tone. I
Yeah,
mean, it's
yeah.
the director should be the one that's talking about the tone.
Yeah, and they were both great in coming up with stuff, having that kind of input from me, but they were also great in just coming up stuff that I would go, oh wow, that's even better than I was thinking that I had in my head.
Yeah.
That's even more creative to the emotional integrity of the character.
Well, that's what they're supposed to do, but it's
Yeah.
great that they can have that relationship with you,
Yeah.
get the guidance, first of all.
No, Chris Boardman and Michael were just the best. I mean, they were
Yeah.
so good to work with, and
Yeah.
so creative. It was just a delight.
Well, when you can get that relationship with a director and a composer, and the shorthand is there, I mean, you can imagine the conversation between Spielberg and Williams. It's probably like
Yeah.
almost nonverbal at this point.
Well, you mentioned John
Wink and a
Ottman,
nod.
and Brian, when we did Superman Returns,
Yeah,
Ottman was the editor and the composer. And I always
that's right.
found
He's an editor too.
yeah,
That's
and
an
I always
interesting combo.
found that like, really, he's going to be the editor and the composer. I mean, does he really have time to think in both ways? And yet, when we started working on the movie and we got into the editing room after we shot in Australia for a year, it was like, wow, this makes all the sense in the world to me.
Yeah.
Well, Pat Buba, who was George's editor, and George by him, it was not a musician, but he had an incredible musical sense. I think that there's something about the idea of cutting and pacing and rhythm and storytelling that an editor has, that music can really inform. And so I can see that with Ottman being both.
Yeah.
And Pat was a classically trained clarinetist. So, they had the same sensibilities.
Yeah, they did. They did.
It seems like Romero, as mentors go, really well. He was a great collaborator.
Oh, he was.
Who trusted everyone who he worked with. That's the idea.
Some of that comes out of the background of being in Pittsburgh with no money and no real support. I mean, you're basically making it up as you go.
Yeah.
When we did Night Riders, it was a SAG, George's first SAG movie, and because of the union rules, we had to have production reports. And to get a good production report, you had to have things like call sheets, which George didn't want to know from. He wanted to like, hey man, just call everybody at 7 a.m. and we'll figure out what we're going to do. George, you can't do that, man. You can't do it that way. It was the best film school I could have ever gone to. And then he and his partner, Richard Rubenstein, created the television show Tales from the Darkside, which was low budget, really low budget, but it was the same attitude. You wanted to make short films, but you all had to kind of pitch in and do everything because, there wasn't a lot of money for everybody to have a definitive role, and that's the only role you did,
That cat has killed 3 people in this household.
I don't believe this.
Kill it, bury it, and bring me its tail.
And George was like, he said, I'll take a good idea from anybody.
What was the organizing principle of Tales from the Darkside as an anthology?
It was simply to continue the whole not Creepshow necessarily, but the idea of anthology.
Mm-hmm.
George grew up with those. We all grew up with those comic books.
Yeah.
Loved that kind of storytelling. From a business point of view, it was great because there was a lot of syndicated opportunities back then, which don't exist now.
Yeah.
And so you go in and you say, I've got a low budget show that, you can have a 20 episode season for a couple of $100,000. Everybody goes, yeah, okay, let's do it.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
yeah,
it
yeah,
costs
yeah.
a couple of $100,000 to make one show. So that was it. And then they got great writers
Yeah.
that were known in the genre. They gave a lot of us opportunities, young directors that were just getting started, some actors that wanted to direct, that people that we knew, you know, things like that.
One of the reasons I asked what the organizing principle is, we've all done a lot of anthologies.
Yeah.
A lot, and anthologies are so hard. Successful anthologies are very hard to pull off. It's very, you can do an anthology, you can do a couple seasons of an anthology. The majority of them, frankly, just aren't that memorable.
Well, no, but look at Crypt. I mean, how many seasons did you guys do? 7 or 8 or something?
Right,
like
right,
that?
right. Well, and I would say, because the franchise was so crystal clear on Crypt, you know, it was, you knew exactly what it was. We're going to come very shortly to a show that we were all involved with called Nightmare Cafe. Well, let's jump in. Let's jump into Nightmare Cafe. Suddenly, your involvement with the George Romero world puts you on the map, and suddenly you are off and running, and you're having yourself a career. Let's just get you to that place. Okay, so you're doing Tales from the Dark Side, and then let's say the phone rings, and someone says, "Hey, John, we'd like you to direct an episode of this thing called Nightmare Cafe." All right, and you said yes.
And it right away.
Okay, yeah, of course, of course. When we were talking the other day, and I said, we talked about Nightmare Cafe, I said, do you know how Nightmare Cafe got on the air? And you said no. And I said, oh, good. We're going to tell you a story about a show you did, because Gil and I were involved peripherally, I guess, in that show. So,
and I never knew that.
I think that might have been intentional.
This all happened the first year that Gil and I were doing Tales from the Crypt.
Right.
Apparently, before this happens, Wes Craven has a meeting on the books. He's going to have lunch with Brandon Tartikoff, who at that point was running NBC.
Right.
And the morning of the lunch that he's going to have with Brandon Tartikoff, Wes Craven is sitting there with his wife and son, his teenage son, saying, I'm having lunch with Brandon today. No idea what I'm going to pitch him today. And the son, the teenage son,
Jonathan,
utters 2 words, Nightmare Cafe. Wes takes those 2 words to lunch with him, with Brandon Tartikoff. And I guess at some point they push back the plates, and Brandon looks at Wes and says, what do you got? And Wes says, Nightmare Cafe. And Brandon Tartikoff, boom, buys it on the spot.
sells it in the room. Yeah.
No idea what it is. No idea. Buys it on the spot. And then I guess they tried to, reverse engineer whatever the hell this thing was.
Then it's like the oh shit moment. Okay, now what do we do?
Right.
So they go and they make a pilot. And Philip Noyce, the Australian director, directed the pilot.
Yeah.
Gil and I are now running Tales from the Crypt, and we get a call. Can you come and meet with Philip Noyce to talk about a pilot he just shot for Wes Craven called Nightmare Cafe? And so Gil and I go and we sit down with Philip Noyce. And first we were shown the pilot.
Yeah.
We watched it. And the question that Philip Noyce had for us was, what is it? What is it? Literally, they had to write the rest of the season.
Yeah.
They made the pilot, and Brandon didn't kill it dead. He said, it's great, I love it. No one knew really quite what it was, and I guess Brandon didn't have the sack to look at Wes and go, Wes, what is this?
So did they have the idea that it was the concept an anthology, or was it just going to be stories about?
Yeah, no, it was an anthology, and I guess Robert Englund.
It was going to be an anthology.
Yeah, it was always that
around the cafe and the 2 people that were in there and all that.
But what's the organizing principle?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Neither did we.
Yeah.
We could not answer the question, and we had a show to run that we knew what the organizing principle was.
Yeah. sudden, bam, you stop. And you're now inside the cafe. Now, I knew that the conceit was that there was this cafe with these two people who were, I'd seen the pilot,
Yeah.
and they were dead. And they were in this purgatory of whatever in the cafe.
Yeah.
And people were going to come through the cafe and their stories were going to get resolved somehow. So if that's what you mean by organizing principle, that's sort of what the story was.
Yeah. So you had to get them there to make something happen.
Yeah. And those two people would help you do it. And somehow, I guess they were going to hope that by doing this for however long, they would eventually move on as well. So what happened? Did you guys, because you guys were not involved in it when I was there.
No, we were never involved in it. We had the meeting, and we sort of really didn't have a clue. Really wanted to meet the people who were making it, and that's why we went to the meeting.
Was Wes there? Did he say what did he?
I think Wes popped his head in.
Yeah.
But he left us alone, with the director.
Yeah.
And then we went, and then we looked at each other and, headed for the hills as quickly as possible to go back to town.
Thank goodness this was someone else's nightmare cafe.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it had a lot of potential, but I don't know what, I don't know whether NBC just dropped the ball and said, we don't want to do anymore. Or...
it was complicated. It was a complicated concept. And I think that was, Tales from the Crypt was simple.
Yeah.
And I think
if Wes were smart, the best thing that could have come out of that whole thing was he should have hired his son as head of development.
There you go. Hey, he at least had some direction.
Well, Jonathan was there for some of it, but I don't know. He was young and kind of untested, and I'm sure the network was probably saying, well, we need,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Fortunately, we all ended up doing Tales from the Crypt instead.
Yeah. Do you remember the show that I did for you guys called The Pit?
Yes. Well, hey, the Wayne Newton episode.
The Wayne Newton episode. You remember, like, every day Wayne would fly his jet down from Vegas.
Right.
He would fly it. Him and his wife, they'd come down. And Gil, you had somebody pick him up at the airport every day in Van Nuys and drive him over to the set.
Yes.
And he'd be on the set all day. And then he'd go back and fly back to Vegas to do his show.
Yeah.
And I was like, Wayne, how the fuck are you doing this, man?
Yeah.
And the last day, I remember he was so exhausted. And for some reason, the schedule had worked out that we were doing a lot of his scenes in his apartment where he's watching the fights and talking to the two guys. And chaos in the cage is what and he was so exhausted. He was like literally sweating, because to just stay on his feet and remember his lines. But he was such a trooper. It blew me away.
And a really nice man. I mean, I would say to
wonderful
him,
guy. Yeah.
We'll put you up. Can we just put you up one night? I mean, so that we can break it in half, stay 2 nights and then go back and forth 2 nights, stay 1 night, and then you can, run for the end, sprint to the end. And he would say, no, I'm okay. I'm fine. I kind of like it. I relax when I fly. And I would go, okay, but we could do that. We could put you up. There's not a big deal if we put you up.
Please don't crash before you finish the
show. Truly. First episode you directed was EASEL Killia with Tim Roth and William Atherton.
Yeah, boy, that was fun. That was really great.
A script by Larry Wilson.
Yep. And it was I loved that episode because I loved the whole tone of it, and I loved the whole what the story was about and the obsessive quality of it.
Yeah,
it had a really nice twist at the end.
Tim Roth was perfectly cast.
Oh yeah, he was great, and he came in to do his ADR, and I said, "Hey Tim, what are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I've been I don't know, I've been doing this other show. It's kind of a low budget thing. I think it's called Jumping at the Boneyard." He didn't even know what the title was. And of course, it was Tarantino's first movie where he's playing, I don't know whether he was Mr. White or Mr. He was the cop.
Reservoir Dogs.
Reservoir Dogs, yeah.
Hey, we rub elbows with some interesting folks, don't we?
Yep.
You also wrote 2 episodes when we went to England. We didn't take any England with you. With us, did?
No. I think you guys decided you were just going to use English In fact, Russell McKay, he did one of them.
He did Horror in the Night. Has Elizabeth McGovern.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then the other one was The Kidnapper, I think.
Yeah, that you co-wrote that with Scott Nimmerfro, and that had Steve Coogan and Julia Sawalha are the leads.
Oh, Steve Coogan. Yeah.
Alan Hume was the DP on that, which is Alan Hume. Do you know who Alan Hume?
The name sounds familiar, but I don't know.
Alan Hume DP'd Star Wars movies, Bond movies, Runaway Train.
Oh, just them.
Oh my God! We had him for a couple of episodes. He was our director of photography.
Yeah.
We thought we'd give him a shot.
Yeah.
We try him out.
See if he could keep up with the television schedule.
Yeah.
You also you had the pleasure of knowing Scott Nimmerfro.
Love the guy.
Yeah. It breaks my heart that Scott isn't here swapping stories with us all.
Well, I met him because I was pitching Dick Donner, who was a fan because of the work I did on Crypt and he had a deal to develop Hammer Film Library.
That's right.
Remember that?
Of course, yeah.
And they hired me to adapt a book they owned called The Hiss, was part of that. And Dick really liked the script, but that's how I met Scott.
Right.
He was with Dick at the time. And so we became friends, and then The Kidnapper came up, and of course he was involved in Crypt, and but he was a really sweet guy. I loved him.
I eventually did too, although initially I didn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Initially,
he had a very dry sense of humor, you know.
Yeah, and all those guys, every one of those people had people like Scott working for them, Bob Zemeckis,
sure,
and they all thought that they were those guys.
Yeah,
and they would come to me and they would say, "Oh, this script," and we would get notes from like 5 different people, and they had no idea really what they were talking about. And sometimes we would get notes, and I would go, Do you understand we finished shooting this episode yesterday? You should have come to give us notes a week ago. I mean, Scott didn't do that.
No.
Scott initially had this arrogance about him because he worked for Dick Donner, which really pissed me off. So we clashed initially.
Yes.
I don't know what happened. It just got to some point where we just sort of started laughing at each other, and then we started working together, and then it was just such a delight, and we actually talked to him and said, let's bring you onto the show. Let's bring you onto Tales from the Crypt as a. Would you like to do that?
Supervising writer.
Yeah. Well, as a story editor or supervising.
Story editor. Yeah.
Whatever you want to, we'll call you whatever you want us to call you. I don't care about that. But Alan, I would love you to, and he did, and he went to England with us.
Yeah.
And that's where I really got to know him a lot better, and really, I mean, we really just would crack each other up all the time.
Well, I got to hand it to you guys. How the hell did you manage Joel Silver, Bob Zemeckis, Walter Hill, Dick Donner? I mean, it's kind of amazing to think that these guys, these heavyweights, were kind of the executive producers of the show. And I mean, I can only imagine what it must have been like to have these guys breathing down your neck. What the?
Well, let's put it this way. You knew me. I had long red hair and a big red beard. And now I don't.
And now you don't.
Bob Z was an exquisite collaborator, and I see him as a mentor in many ways. Everything I know about collaboration, really, that man taught me. He's remarkably giving as a collaborator. Donner, lovely man, but he never really bothered us too much in what we were doing. Joel, however, was always something else entirely.
Well, there was a force of nature.
Yeah, and the Bordello of Blood story is really the story of really Joel using our movie as a prop for another movie, and so did Universal. We were no no one really gave a shit about Bordello. No one wanted to make that movie. And
Well, how did it get launched? I mean, what was it just a
there's
script?
there's a whole podcast about it called the Hell
Oh,
Movie Pod. But the short version is the mandate from Universal was to make 3 different movies. And the first movie is a really good movie called Demon Knight that Ernest Dickerson directed. It's a terrific movie. It's 25 plus years later. It's still considered a horror classic.
Yeah.
The second movie we were developing, we had a project that we had turned. It was originally a script called Fat Tuesday. We rewrote it and turned it into a thing called Dead Easy. It was a psychological thriller that took place in New Orleans, very different from the first movie. And we spent 6 weeks in New Orleans prepping the thing. We were 3 weeks from starting principal photography in New Orleans when Universal said, come home, you're not making that movie. You're going to make this other thing called Bordello of Blood instead. By the way, your release schedule is the same. You start in 3 weeks. And the reason
you've got 3 weeks to rewrite it. And start shooting it.
Prep it. Yeah. Oh,
and
God.
the reason it was that they wanted us to make Bordello of Blood was because a little while before, a brand new studio had come into being called DreamWorks.
Oh.
And Universal had lost a big piece of talent, Spielberg. They were afraid as DreamWorks was making deals, they'd lose another piece of talent, Zemeckis. And so they said, Bob, what can we do to keep you here? And part of the deal was nothing to do with us. It was, he said, because he was always very, very good to his partner, Gail. Bob Gale. And so to help Gale out, he said, hey, if you were to buy the first script that Gale and I wrote when we were at USC, it was called Bordello of Blood, that'd be cool. That was it. So Universal spent $500,000 to buy a student script. And they made, okay, to their credit, a good business decision. Why eat $500,000? So they turned around, they looked at us and said, hey, he's an executive producer on your movie. His name is worth more on a script than your name is, Gillen and my name is. So you're going to make this movie instead. It was nothing to them. To them, this was a good decision.
But they wanted you to fix it.
Well,
yeah.
Hey, at this
Or
point,
they weren't going to get Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis to fix it.
No,
they were just going to take the $500,000.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you got 3 weeks go. So, so it started, Bordello started that way. And we didn't want to make that movie. We didn't want to rewrite it. We didn't want to do anything. And then when we got to casting the 3 leads, Joel took over. And
but to answer your question, the answer is, I don't know. I've worked with Joel for, I think, 13 years, making a lot of movies and television.
Yeah.
And it ended very, abruptly and badly when he threatened me and said, you'll never work in this town again. When Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who was running Warner's at the time, said, I love what you do. I want you making bigger movies for me here at Warner Brothers. And Joel heard
and Lorenzo said, you will work in this town again.
So, and that was it. But we had worked together for, more years than I care to admit to. And I'm as amazed as anyone else when I think back and go, how did that happen? How did I survive?
How did you survive it?
Yeah.
Well, I had very brief encounters with Joel, and it was always very cursory and very matter of fact. He came down to the set on Pitt. And when remember we had downtown, we had built the cage at the whatever the arena was down there.
Yeah.
I was really proud of it because it was really a beautiful looking set. The actors were great. And he was sitting behind me and I was saying, Joel, look at this. Look at what these guys helped me get to, and he kind of went, and he just pointed back to the thing, get back to directing.
It's a great looking episode. You have a great eye.
Well, the fun part was like, okay, we're down here. How are we going to make it seem like there are thousands of people in the stands? Which, of course, we had none of. We didn't even have the cardboard figures in the background. So I had Rick Boda just light it like all dark, around outside. But we did go up into the balcony and I put people. In fact, you guys might even been part of it. I might have roped you into it. And so I shot behind everybody so that all you saw was silhouettes. and just like shoulders, and crowded the frame so that you just see hands going up in the air and that kind of stuff. And made
We
it
are
seem
in the
like-
smoke and mirrors business, are we not?
Absolutely. I just finished a book, by the way, which you guys would probably love, called by William. It's a biography of William Cameron Menzies, the great art director, production designer, director, who transcends the whole history of Hollywood, really. But he started out essentially just as an artist, almost like a storyboard artist. And when you listen to some of the movies that he did, and how, from everybody from like Republic to all the low rent places back in the day, what's the name that begins with an M? Anyway,
Mutual.
Yeah, but he would do these movies, and he would draw he would draw the whole movie.
Yeah,
Because he knew that he didn't have enough money to build these huge sets. I mean, occasionally, like he did a lot of work on Gone with the Wind. He did a lot of work on The Shape of Things to Come, those kinds of movies. But a lot of them, when he got a chance to direct, were very small, and he would design them to be shot to look big, but he drew them so they'd only build part of a set.
Yeah.
You know, they'd only the way his angles were so evocative. And man, it's such a great book. I've learned I want to get back out on the floor and try some of this shit.
Sure. Hey, everything old is new again, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Did you approach the Dune project, or did the Dune project when you did Dune for sci-fi, or did that approach you?
Well, Richard Rubinstein was the producer, and
Right.
Richard goes way back to the Romero days. He was he was George's partner.
Yep.
They created Tales from the Darkside. We did Creepshow, Day of the Dead. I did the Darkside movie for them for Paramount. So I had a relationship with him.
What are they doing?
And he called me up one day and said, "Look, I'm going to be in Los Angeles. Can we have lunch?" I said, "Yeah." He said, I've had some success with turning books into miniseries. He had done The Stand, Langoliers. He had a good relationship with Steve King. And he said, I was looking for something to do, and I was looking at my bookshelf, and I came across this book. Have you ever read a book called Frank Herbert's Dune? I said, yeah, I read it. I read it, you know, in college, and he said, well, I think I can sell this. ABC is my partner. I think we're going to go to sci-fi. I think we can sell it. Would you be interested in adapting it and doing it? We're looking for somebody to do that. And would you put a pitch together for me? So, of course, I jumped at the chance.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen David Lynch's movie.
Yeah.
Was not a huge fan. It was beautiful in many ways, but it wasn't the story. So I pitched it, and he loved it. And sci-fi.
What part, as you looked at the David Lynch movie, what did it miss?
Oh, well, quite a lot. Without getting into the weeds too much, there was one of the main things that he did. If you know the book, there's a lot of internal monologue. There are a lot of people thinking about what is going on. There's a lot of mysticism in the book. And so one of the things that David did in order to get a lot of that across was he did voiceover. So there were a lot of moments in the movie where you suddenly were on the guy's face in a close-up and nothing was happening, and you were just listening to this monologue going on. It stopped the movie. The other thing that he did was there's a use, the Bene Gesserit have a use of what they call the voice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he turned it into a whole trope in the movie about making it a weapon, which is not at all what the story is about. Those two things, you know, I thought, well, that's not, but the biggest problem in the movie is that he's trying to tell this epic story in a 2-hour movie. There's too much story. And they had to hand out, when I went to see it, they actually handed out a booklet that told you who the characters were, what the plot was, what the significance of the relationships of who the royal houses were, what the empire was. And I went to see it with my brother, and 10 minutes in, we looked at each other. My brother said, "Man, I'm lost.
Yeah.
I don't understand what's going on here."
That's the problem. That's why, yeah, it is not a movie. It's got to be bigger.
And so De Laurentiis took it away from Lynch. So he probably, maybe if left to his own devices, might have come up with an 8-hour epic that would have been fantastic.
Yes.
But so I got the shot, and fortunately, I had 3 movies to tell the story because we had 3 nights of miniseries, so I could really dive into it. And
just like a sandworm.
Yeah.
The special effects look really good.
You can see some age around the edges, but back then we were state of the art. I mean, they won Emmys for it.
Yeah. You can't compare it to the latest cinematic incarnation because they had way more money than you did.
They had 10 times the money.
Yeah. But
we did 3 movies for 20 million. I think they had 200 million to do the first one.
Yeah. No, I really and truly, I think the sandworms are great. It's very compelling. There's great stuff.
I'm proud of it, Alan, because I think, and a lot of people, Frank Herbert's son, Frank wasn't alive anymore, but he said that his dad would really be proud. Yes, it's a little dated in, what is it, 20 some years now, 20 years, but people still, when they see it, they say, well, it's a great adaptation of the story. The story is all there. And I have to say, and I don't want to sound pretentious about this, but I do believe that the success of that miniseries, because it was a big international hit, kept the idea of doing it alive. Because after David's movie, everybody said, this book is unfilmable. You cannot do this book. It's a waste of time to even try. But the success of it was, I think it kept it alive. And Richard and I are still involved in the latest incarnation, and it's been going on for about some years until they finally got Villeneuve to do it.
You sort of cracked the nut, which was don't do it as one.
Yes, well, when I heard that Denis was going to do it as 2 movies at least, it might be 3. It was like, okay, this could work.
It required an evolution from the business's thinking that you could break a big story up into pieces and the audience would be okay with it. That's
like a Lord of the Rings or
right. Exactly.
Exactly.
The business had the guys with the money had to start thinking outside their little box.
Yeah.
In order to accommodate ideas bigger than their box.
Yeah. Yep.
What else is new?
The audience came around to it.
Of course they did. You remember there was a Broadway play. It came from London, Nicholas Nickleby.
Oh yeah.
And what it required of its audience was, my God, you're going to spend 2 days in the theater.
2 days. You're going to have lunch, then you're going to have dinner. And you're going to keep it. I remember that. And
people loved it. If you tell a great story, hey, and the story is going to make us go outside the box with you, we will happily go there if you justify the journey.
Well, it goes back to people like Dickens and everybody else. Storytelling over a serialized period of time, draw people in, and they want to stay with it. People are dying to see the next Dune. People were waiting every year for the next Lord of the Rings and the next Harry Potter.
Zombies do not ever get old.
Well, they don't die, Alan. What do you want? I mean.
So they don't get old since they don't die.
That's right.
You just finished a book. Did you write that during the pandemic, during the shutdown?
As we get to certain stages in our career, things sort of change around a little bit. And people aren't throwing scripts at me to come out and direct. So I got time, but I've got stories, and that's one that I've had for a while. And few years ago, I sat down with another idea, which I had been carrying around, and I started to write it as a treatment. And I realized, actually, it's starting to feel like
wrong medium.
Yeah, it's reading like prose, and I bet if I just sort of concentrated on that, I could do it. And I had this other one So when I had the time, I sat down and started doodling, and I wonder if, and it actually turned out okay.
What was, just from a writing process, did it differ writing narrative fiction? Did it differ from writing a screenplay in the process?
Well, structurally, of course, yeah. I mean, but yes, it did. It's a whole different mindset, because you're really putting yourself in the lives of the characters as opposed to visualizing what's happening with them. I don't know whether that makes any sense.
You have to create so much more of the universe.
The interior of the characters is so much more. I mean, you could just write it like this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. But I don't think readers find that very satisfying. I think they want to be compelled by the characters. Although I will say that having done a lot of filmmaking, especially for a book like this, it's a genre book. I mean, it's a psychological paranormal thriller. So it has, I would say that my filmmaking informed the narrative pace of it. You know, I don't say I wrote it like a movie. You know, some books people say, oh, well, it's, you know, the book is a movie. And I didn't write it like that, but it had a visual sense.
The thing about screenwriting is because you must be as economical as possible with your words, you've got to locate.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
You've got to find your inner Hemingway. Really, and
Yeah.
it was good. He liked it. It was good. Hey, man, if that's all it takes
Right.
for the actor to know what he's got to do, and for all the department heads to know what they got to do, leave it at that.
Hey, did you guys ever work with Fred Decker? Did he ever do any crypts?
He
wrote
did.
Well,
before we got there.
Oh, okay. He wrote a script a long time ago, which I read, and it was like a real revelation to me about screenwriting. It was called Ricochet, I think was the name of it. And they actually made a
they did.
Denzel
Russell Mulcahy directed it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, Fred's script was so economical. You know how sometimes you get a script and there's like, it might have been Joel that actually said this, actually. There's too much black. There's too much stuff on the page. You know, you have to read it's arduous to read it.
Yeah.
And so
too many words, too many notes.
Too many notes. But and it's written like but people, that's not what a film is. Like you just said, Alan, it's like it's very like right to the point and everything. And that's the way Fred wrote. In fact, he never wrote a sentence that went all the way across the page.
Right.
He wrote in bullets.
Yeah. Because you really just want to get image. And
it's easier for your eye to go down the page than it is to go back and forth across the page.
And I used to tell people, look, when you're writing screenplays, there's no such thing as adjectives. Get rid of all the adjectives.
Right.
The adverbs, get rid of all the adverbs. Save the adverbs and the adjectives for a book.
Yeah.
A book needs all that.
Yep.
Because you really have to build everything in the reader's mind, the color, the texture, the tone. Whereas in a movie, no. It's more about character and relationship, and it's image.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Gil. And so to invest a screenplay with good writing is really a waste of time.
Yeah.
Who are you doing it for?
Who are you doing it for? So, I mean, a lot of my writer friends probably would hate to hear that, but I think you're right. It's image, character, and action, kinetic.
Perhaps even the word impressionism.
Impression,
it's just dabs of painting, man. You don't need long brush strokes. Dab, man.
And I've been working on that style ever since. I mean, I read that screenplay and it was like, holy crap, this is exactly what it should be, because it was so exciting to read. And, you could see the movie.
Right.
Hey, and that's really tricky because the screenplay format is not a writer-friendly format. It's a DGA-friendly format.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other conversation. Oh, God,
yes,
don't get
that's another
started.
podcast, right?
Indeed. What is your book called?
Passing Through Veils.
Passing through veil and spell veils.
Veils, like
Those
the
kind
veil,
of veils, as opposed to veils of doom.
Veils of Doom. Yeah, no, it's about a young woman who is moving into a townhouse in Georgetown, which she's going to restore. She's just recovering from a massive nervous breakdown of her own that ruined a really promising career as an attorney, high-powered corporate attorney. And you find out why, and all the reasons are part of the story. But as she's restoring this townhouse, she finds a walled up vanity in one of the rooms. And in that vanity are some artifacts which were owned by the woman who was murdered in the house some years before. And strange things start to happen. And you begin to wonder whether the ghost of this woman in the house is coming back for some kind of revenge, or whether it's in our girl's mind. And then there's a big twist at the end as to who did what to whom.
Cool. When is it dropping?
August 15th. It's released a Wordfire Press, and it'll be out August 15th. It's available for pre-sale now. You can go to Wordfire Press and get it, order it.
And we will link on our blog as we publish this. We'll do everything we can.
Oh, I'll tell you what. I'll
I'll
send you the cover. I'll send you the cover.
Yeah. Please.
The image. You can put. But no, it was a great experience to do. Unfortunately, it's actually going to come out. There's not much money in the publishing business, but I don't care. It's like a creative.
Oh.
Do we anticipate the book being written by, oh God, I don't know, some really talented writer director that you have a close relationship with that might want to do it?
Well, my agent, I've said to him, see if, take it out there, see if there's anybody that might want to, not necessarily for me to do, that might be a bridge too far, but I would not object if somebody saw it as, because there are all these great cable shows on now with young women in jeopardizing situations, and or maybe a feature, starring Sandra Bullock or Reese Witherspoon, or
could it be stretched out into 20, 30 episodes as a streaming series?
Maybe not 20 episodes. But yeah, it could definitely be like an 8-episode limited series.
There you go.
Sure.
Hey, everything's outside the box these days.
Absolutely. You won't get any argument from me.
John, it has been awesome catching up with you.
Yeah, it's been great to see you guys.
This is the longest conversation we've ever had. Even the times we worked together, I don't think we had a chance to sit down and actually spend quality time together.
Well, no, because Gil always was like, get back out on the set, man. What are you doing?
Bloody taskmaster.
Wait a second, John. Get back on the set. What are you taking all this time talking
about? Why am I not writing?
Indeed. Again, thank you so much for joining us, John, and sitting down with us. And
it's been fun. Really been fun.
Seeing you, John. And next time you come to Vancouver, please call me.
I will. Send me your email address so I have that contact information.
Okay.
He absolutely
have
will.
Alan send it to me.
And we will see you next time, everybody. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrible Crypt content.